Well, the question of Lobola sometimes can be very controversial. Uh, Lobola is part of the African way of negotiating a marriage. Sometimes when it is translated, it doesn't come out as it's supposed to be. And sometimes they use it as a dowry, or sometimes they talk about bride price as if you are selling. There's a transaction. But I think in its innocence, Lobola was meant to be a way in which those who are the couple that are marrying into a particular family to show appreciation, to show the love for the family, even for your wife to be, was to negotiate this call it a price, at least for now, for lack of better word. So to just appreciate more than anything else, it is a sign of appreciation. It was also a sign of honoring, recognizing that your wife to be comes from a family, was raised by the particular family. But unfortunately, as things evolve and obviously cultures gets to be perverted, or at least cultural activities can easily be perverted and also misconstrued. Of late, it is sad when you begin to realize that this is more of a transactional money-making business. And it is really saddening ones to see that, because in the olden days, that was really not necessarily the ideal. Now, the big question, obviously, when someone start asking and say, well, it is not in the scripture, why should I do it? Obviously, there is no verse and chapter in the scripture that talks about Lobola. There are some few inferences that you can find. For an example, I mean, if you look at in the Old Testament, there would have been examples such as when Jacob went to stay with Laban and having to work at least to show appreciation before he could marry Laban's daughters. I mean, it's just an example that shows that there was an element of appreciation at one, much as Laban was not a good father-in-law in terms of how he treated Jacob, but the principle was there also. So I think it is important to recognize this. For me, it is to take what is good in a culture, okay? And I think us as Christians, it is very important to say there are certain things that are cultural that can be redeemed. And I often talk about redeeming our cultures. Take what is good and use it for the benefit and for the goodness of whatever it is that we are facing. So I would encourage young Christians who are preparing to get married, not necessarily to fight this whole thing because it is not clearly stated in scriptures, but to begin to use what would have been the cultural preference, like I said at the top of this talk, that see it as an opportunity for you to appreciate the parents of your future husband, where you are saying, I really like to honor you for raising up my future wife. So that is probably one way to say. Of course, there is no verse and chapter for that. It is just showing your love. Now, there's also a question that goes with, now, should Christian parents really follow this kind of a culture and practice of having to ask for Lobola? Well, I don't know if there's any law that necessarily bars one. But if you go back to what I've said earlier on, if this is done in terms of the essence of what the culture was, meaning in terms of saying it's an appreciation that can be shown, I see no reason or I could not fault any parent who is actually asking for Lobola. Now, I think the biggest thing today is this kind of Lobola negotiations that are going around. And sometimes the bidding that goes with it, the negotiations, and then sometimes it's way over. And especially if you look at it where parents are saying, well, I've raised my children, I send them to university, they are professional, and therefore I'm going to put the bar here. I mean, I think once those kind of things gets to become a factor, sometimes it makes it very difficult even for people who wants to get married to find it very difficult, because you start working late in years, for an example, and obviously trying to raise money and all of those things. And you find that Lobola is so high, you can't even afford it. Then it really makes things very sour and very bitter at times, and maybe even disrupt those kind of marriages. So my encouragement for parents really is to avoid making this a transactional money-making business, but rather be considerate. Even if your daughter was well educated, is a professional, but I think be a Christian, be loving, remembering that by so doing you're also going to gain a son-in-law in that kind of arrangement.